This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. In each episode, we bring you information, insights, and ideas from some of the industry's top thought leaders. Connect with us to help pick the topic and guide the show.
This is Media Sales Mastery, the podcast for media sales professionals. I'm your host, Jamie Wood. Our topic today, unlocking competitive advantage. Now, whether you're selling media direct or within an agency environment, you are competing in a broader marketplace. And in most media markets around the world, regardless of their size, there is a finite amount of revenue opportunity and a lot of publishers all vying for the same revenue. So this is true in a market like New York. This is true in a market with 200,000 people like Toowoomba here in Australia. Your ability to conduct a thorough competitive analysis of your market, to identify the deficiencies and the strengths in your own proposition, and then formulate a cogent plan to exploit your competitive advantage is absolutely critical to success, particularly in today's marketplace. Our guest today is Sarah Williams. She's based in New York. Sarah is a sales trainer for Spotify across the Americas, and it's really cool to have her on just to get a perspective of some of the different nuances of markets, particularly in a country like continental US, which has 52 different states, all with different sub-markets within them. So going to be getting into that today. Thank you again for all the love and for people following my LinkedIn. Again, I'm just posting a lot more regularly there. I really appreciate people liking, commenting, sending me questions, sending me topics, and engaging with the podcast. Without any further ado, let's get into it.
The first 5.
Sarah, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Really good. I think we took a bit of coordinating to make New York and Brisbane time differences work, but it seems like we've aligned it. First of all, how are things going over there? How is winter treating you at the moment, and how are you kind of, I suppose, experiencing the media market over there over the last 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, winter sucks. I will say that. It's definitely different. It goes for a very long time. These are some of the things that surprised me when I moved here, although we did just have daylight savings, the time change on the weekend. So it's getting better. It's getting warmer every day. It's getting lighter every single night. Things are on the up.
Oh, good.
Media here over the past 6 months, honestly, I mean, America's approach to COVID is very different, as I'm sure the world knows. So things are normal. Things are back. We're, traveling. We're going to events. We're meeting with clients. It's like kind of like nothing ever happened, more and more every day.
Yeah, a few people that we've had on the pod who either travel there or have been based there for a while really say that life kind of has gone back to normal for all intents and purposes, which is kind of encouraging to hear for those of us in other markets like Australia, where it's still very present in our minds. Obviously, you're an expat Aussie. Before we get into the topic, tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us about your current gig at Spotify, and would love to hear a little bit about your journey in media so far.
Yeah, of course. So I'll start off with my journey in media. It has been fun. I studied comm radio at CSU in Bathurst. That then led me to my first role in media, which is where I worked at DMG in direct sales, so radio selling. Then I bounced between sales and sales support for a few years. I worked in print and out of home before joining the team at O Media. O Media, I was there for about 3.5 years and was really lucky enough to be given the opportunity to lead the sales operations team for the Locate business. I think that role for me and that team and the people I got to work with was a really huge turning point to understand something I'd been really grappling with my entire, I guess you could call it a career at that point. But it was really that, hey, I love sales, but I don't need to be a seller to feel fulfilled, because the strategic planning side of sales and, being involved in arming our sales team with everything they need to go out there and win is actually what really excites me. It's where I really kind of felt passionate. And I feel like when the sales team I'm working with wins, I win. So I think for me, that was a huge part of my career and where my career really began, because finding out where your satisfaction and drive comes from is what turns, your job into your career. And it makes what you're doing so much more fun And like life is way too short to not be doing what is fun and fulfilling for us. So I then in 2019 moved across to New York. I started running the sales training and enablement for a tech company here called Media Radar. Was there for a couple of years before moving into my current role at Spotify. Here at Spotify, I'm in the global sales enablement and training team. So we're responsible for, all onboarding of new people in the ads business, ongoing training and development, any kind of needs assessment, our enablement tools and relationships with vendors, as well as coaching and learning pathways. So for me, it's fun. Spotify is such a great business. It's a really exciting time to be in this space, and I'm loving it. It is, like we said earlier, like the city is back. So it's a fun time to be here.
It's an interesting experience base that you have to kind of talk about today's topic, which is all around unlocking competitive advantage. And one of the things that I'm really curious to know, I mean, you said you're a sales trainer for the Americas with Spotify. So we're talking about continental US and South America. Is that right? We're talking about both the Americas and then all of the markets that exist within them, and then all of the smaller markets that might exist within those markets.
Correct.
From your observation, like how different is each city, aka market, in terms of the competitive set, the client and customer profile, the challenges and the needs of the sales teams? Like how different are all the different markets, at a broad level?
Yeah. I mean, look, the good thing is that no matter what you're selling, no matter where you're selling it, and so for me, in terms of people that I'm training, you're going to come across really similar challenges, right? So it doesn't matter if it was the team I worked with in Sydney or, one of the teams here who are based out of LA as an example. Your competitive set is anyone who can speak to your audience. And so, I mean, again, regardless of where you are, what you're selling, digital is everywhere, social is everywhere, out of home is almost everywhere. Maybe you work for the only newspaper in your city, and so you think that you've got a bit of a cornered market, but you're still competing against such a range of formats. It may win you some deals, but it won't win you everything. So I really think that regardless of the market you're in, you do need to find what's really special about the way your audience communicates with you and that relationship that you have with them, because how you differ is key in that situation. I think from a client point of view too, I mean, the clients will change slightly depending on what market you're working in, but you're going to have, clients who are led by marketers who have the same needs and wants and desires in what they're buying from media sellers. So I really just don't think that there is a huge difference. I mean, obviously it would be more different if I was somewhere where there were, different market languages being spoken. But besides language, it's the same thing wherever you are.
It really feels like the theme of this podcast. I've spoken to guests who are based in South Africa, Malaysia, the United Arab Emirates, the US, obviously Australia. Everywhere is very, very similar. Like, it's kind of amazing. Like, even in like a frontier market, we had a gentleman, Gary Strobel, who was based in Windhoek, which is in Namibia. And even he was saying, look, we're probably not as technologically advanced as, say, some of the more developed markets, but fundamentally, it's exactly the same everywhere that I've been. So it's interesting, I guess, through that prism, thinking about today's main topic and getting into it.
Media Sales Mastery.
So unlocking competitive advantage is the topic. Let's kind of start at the beginning. What, in your observation, or what would be a definition that you might put out there around competitive advantage, and why is it so important, to expand your point before?
Competitive advantage is essentially whatever you do differently and what allows you to sell easily. I don't personally think that you need a competitive advantage to sell your product, but I do think that it really helps. And, as sellers know, anytime we can get some help, we'll take it. I do think that competitive advantage is really important because it plays into your value proposition. It can really trigger purchases. It'll be the reason brands and agencies buy from you and not from someone else. I think especially in media, we do work in a really competitive environment, and on all sides as well, right? It's competitive for the brands, it's competitive for the agencies. it's competitive for us as publishers. So I don't think that it's necessarily on one side of the fence, but I do know that any, brief or RFP that you receive will be to multiple vendors, and you should be fighting for not only your share, but for more. And having a strong competitive advantage can allow you to have conversations where you unlock more revenue.
You made a good point around differentiation there. It's something that makes you different. And the one thing I find really interesting is that this is where a lot of media salespeople and probably the publishers can actually really miss the mark, is that they might find what they think is a differentiation point, but it might not necessarily be valued by the market or by clients. Is that something you've observed? Like, hey, our differentiator is our scale. And the clients go, oh, I can't afford to buy your entire audience, so why is that meaningful to me? Like it sometimes can feel like the differentiators are more from inside the media organization as opposed to what the clients actually think the differentiator is.
Yeah, I think that's a huge part of it, right? Like, I'm really big on empathetic-led selling and strategy. And I think that one thing that people in the media industry do, myself included, is we get very caught up in the competition. So we're focused on, my advantage is scale because my competitor doesn't have scale. So that's what I'm going to sell to. When really the better way to approach that would be to speak to your clients, speak to your agencies and the accounts that you work with, and ask them and uncover what they want, what's going to make their life easier, what barriers can you remove for them, and sell into that, as opposed to just selling against whoever else is in the market with you. I think that that's like, you just unlocked a huge issue that we all have, is that we go directly for the competitor without actually understanding why scale is good. It would only take one conversation with that client to know that they don't have the budget to buy absolutely everything that you have to help you transition in a different direction, instead of just, knowing that they're also speaking to that competitor and then shoving it down their throat because you think that it's the only thing that differentiates the two.
I think it's great that we agree on that, because I'd love to then go, if it's really from the customer's lens in terms of what a competitive advantage is, what are some examples of different competitive advantages that media operators may have in a market? Scale, multiple assets or formats, audience quality, audience size, price, right? Like, price can actually be a competitive advantage in some regards if that's the strategy. Are there some examples you can kind of throw out that represent what you think are sustainable competitive advantages that you believe would really give a media salesperson and an organization an edge if they had it?
Yeah, so you just mentioned a few of them, right? And if we're thinking of ourselves as the clients, price is a huge one. Can I even afford it? Am I getting a good deal? Right? People want to buy something where they feel like they are actually getting a really good deal and they're doing something new. As sellers, I think we hear the phrase industry first often. So I think that is a big part of it. And it's not necessarily the price, the cost, but it's more about how you make them feel about that cost and the package and what you can actually do with them. Scale of assets is good, but again, really thinking about, can we reach, maybe we have amazing scale, but can we reach everywhere they actually want to be live? Or are they going to have to piece us together with someone else in order to reach full scale, right? Same with premium assets. Some buyers and brands will really care about this. Some are just worried about the reach and they're not too concerned about the asset being super premium or aesthetic. I think targeting abilities are a really big one. So in this day and age, do you have the tech to allow for me to have really low wastage? And do you have a strong relationship with the audience where I can target people who I know will like and want to buy my product, and I know that they have an authentic relationship with you, and so they're going to see it as a trusted place to hear that piece of information. All of those things that we've spoken about so far are things that a seller or an individual contributor can't always control. But, the things that you can control as a seller, and things that will be really sustainable and stay with you forever, are the ease of transaction. Is it easy to buy from you? Is it easy to launch a campaign? Is it how, me as a brand are buying other media formats, or is it different? Am I receiving 400 emails from you and your team to get this campaign live? Am I having to chase for pops or delivery reporting? How can you make that transaction from buying to getting the campaign live to reporting on it afterwards so seamless and easy and leave, a really positive taste in that person's mouth after every single interaction. That is something that is within your control. What is also in your control is the relationship. So in the media industry, relationships are huge. Sometimes that relationship or a larger annual deal could be what is standing in your way between getting a part of a brief, because maybe, someone has a stronger relationship. Someone knows when their budget turns over for the year. Someone else did their research and, linked up with that account at a time that was more suitable for them. And so now they've locked away a larger portion of their revenue for the entire year that you're not really going to be able to get, or you're going to have to fight for. So I think that those two things, that ease of transaction and that relationship, are what sellers should be really focused on. And I want to make it clear that relationship, obviously we all love going out for lunch, but the relationship is not necessarily, who can have the best time on a Friday, but it is really uncovering more about the account, more about that person, more about the pain points, and how you can make yourself easy to work with.
Such a great call there on the end there around relationship, because it's such a catch-all term and it can be really misinterpreted a lot of the time. Oh, they've got a great relationship. To your point, relationship is actually really, fundamentally, it's about trust, but it's also about insight. Understanding what is meaningful and important to the client, understanding how they like to buy, understanding why they buy. To me, that's actually relationship. And a lot of people probably might have a differing opinion, but I've always felt like, to your point there, competitive advantage from the point of view of ease of transaction is absolutely the way to go in any business. Like, you could have an inferior product if you're incredibly easy to buy, and if you make the process a delight and you're appropriate in your communication in terms of the volume of communication, and you're proactive, that can actually really account for a lot. It can certainly make publishers take an unfair share of the market when their product or audience might not necessarily warrant that kind of a budget split.
Yeah. I mean, marketers and media buyers are people too. Like, they want to get off work so that they can go to the gym. They want to go see their partner. They want to see their family. They don't want to be there all night. So it's like, how do I make this easy for you? And in turn, that will help us build this relationship. And over time, you can really build that trust. I really agree with you there. Like, trust at the end of the day is everything.
So if I'm somebody who's a couple of years into my first media sales gig, maybe I've got a really broad product suite, a whole bunch of different tools in the kit bag. I'm in a competitive market, and I haven't really had a clear competitive advantage articulated to me by the organization, or whatever the competitive advantage that the organization thinks they have isn't really landing or isn't translating. What might be a way that I could sort of diagnose or start to uncover what my area of competitive advantage might be? Is there sort of a framework that you'd recommend somebody use, or any sort of tips to just really do a bit of a diagnostic on that situation?
I definitely think a lot of people are in that boat. It's something that is not covered in onboarding training and should be covered in onboarding training. Yeah. The best way to uncover it, I mean, again, think about that empathy-led selling strategy. So think about the clients that you're working with. What do they like? What do they not like? Really ask them for feedback. I think a lot of the time in ad sales too, especially when you are newer to the career path and you get thrown into it and you're, really just running campaigns, we really get caught up in, presenting the new parts of our narrative, our new offering. We're presenting post-campaign reporting. We're really not asking questions to the client about the process and looking for improvements. We're presenting to them. So I think that would be my absolute first step, is every time you have a client conversation, ask them a question, right? And make sure that you are actually stopping, listening, absorbing what they're telling you, and then using it to improve your future conversations with them and all clients that you work with. That would be step one. The second thing I would do is I would really get to know your competition. I'm a really big fan of blue ocean thinking. And so that's a strategy that Adam Cadwallader, CEO now of Moshio, explained to me years ago, which I think about often. I really rely on it constantly. And the premise of it is that you want to know your competitors and you want to know everything about them so that you can work as a trusted advisor to your partners and you can actually give them the full lay of the land. You can give them really educated guidance, and you can have deeper conversations with them because of that. You really don't want to, get into it. We were talking about it earlier, where you're so focused on the competition that you're not looking at what the client actually wants or needs. And you get caught up in the competition, price matching, trying to apply additional discounts so that you can beat them. In that market, you're really fighting for existing market demand. And I think that if you put yourself in the seat of the client, obviously to me, if you're selling to me, you're going to tell me that your product is better. And so if that's all you say, I now don't really trust you or your opinion. But if you're able to take a step back and give me a really educated opinion, then that relationship will open up, it'll deepen, you'll have access to uncontested market space, and I will most likely let you into conversations about my overall strategy and thinking. That's definitely a really narrow example of the theory, so I would encourage anyone interested in it or in that position where they do really want to kind of work on uncovering their competitive advantage to read the Red Ocean, Blue Ocean book or Google it and, learn a bit more about it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because I'll link that in the show notes. And at a real high level, Blue Ocean Strategy, the book itself, effectively what it's about is looking at two different market sets. One is a red ocean, which is basically a contested marketplace, which is a bunch of people all vying for the same revenue and same opportunity. And competitive advantage absolutely plays a role in battling for those revenue opportunities, right? Like you're in a tight market, there's finite opportunity, you have to find a way to give yourself an edge and to be able to take a share of that. Blue ocean is this idea of uncontested market space. It's market space that people aren't necessarily vying for. And I think if you've read the book, Sarah, I think they use Cirque du Soleil as like a good example of a blue ocean where the circus industry was kind of tired, it was redundant, it was quite, becoming quite dated. And then Cirque du Soleil just kind of came out and created this entirely new market segment and this entirely new proposition. I think in a media sense, I don't know if you've been keeping your eyes on the Australian market, but I feel like maybe the Boomtown Initiative is a good example of a blue ocean strategy in the Australian media market. Something around arousing more interest and appetite for regional audiences and sort of looking to grow the pie and sort of showcase them as an underrepresented audience segment rather than kind of battling it out for the metro audiences that everyone's vying for. So really, I'm really glad you landed on that point actually, because it's a really good reminder sometimes. I posted on LinkedIn recently about this around, you've only got finite resourcing in terms of time, people or money. And as a media salesperson, you have to deploy those as efficiently as you can. Don't let the ego battle of taking the battle to your competitor cloud your judgment when you can maybe go and find that revenue somewhere else a little bit easier as well. Exactly.
And don't get caught up in that fight where you're fighting for something and there could be so much more on the client's mind. Like your example, maybe their issue is actually they need to target people in the regional market, but no one's having a conversation to them about that. And they haven't thought to brief you on it because you're constantly battling it out for that small market that you're really focused on. So I think, anytime you can apply that theory to anything you're doing as loosely as I just did, I think it's just a good way to take a step back and really think about it as like, am I getting too caught up in this situation?
The other thing that I think is reflecting on that point you made is sometimes it can be difficult to figure out what your competitive advantage might be, or it can be difficult to think of an example of it. Reverse it. Where are you feeling the pain from your competitive set? So what are some of the things where you're losing business and there's a trend that's emerging and you're going, oh, you know what, they're really starting to outmaneuver us here, here, and here. So it's actually quite easy to pick a competitive advantage. It's just, unfortunately, it's easier to identify when you're on the receiving end of a loss because of it.
Yeah.
And I know, again, I'll reflect on radio here in Australia because that's where I spent the majority of my career. Southern Cross Stereo, there were probably about 2 or 3 examples in maybe my final 5 years in radio where they really put a sustainable competitive advantage out there in the market and gave me a lot of pain. Things like, bundling their digital radio and their terrestrial radio together and sort of syndicating across all the stations. That was a good 6 months of, all right, this is a hard one to actually nullify or compete against. It's probably pretty easy for people listening to go, yeah, you've probably got some strong competitors there that have a really strong proposition that you find it difficult to compete against. That's a competitive advantage. And maybe the question is, though, sometimes, do people try to fight fire with fire sometimes when it comes to that? Oh, they're doing this really well, we need to do this better, as opposed to maybe trying to differentiate in another way.
Yeah. Do people even want what they're doing? Is that working? Am I losing deals because of it? If not, then, move in another direction.
And this is the other thing too. I mean, the market's ever changing, particularly the rate of change at the moment. Is a competitive advantage something that is kind of constantly changing? Like, how long-term or sustainable is a competitive advantage in the current media environment in your view?
I think it depends. The things that are within your control, you'll take with you everywhere you go, and they can stay with you. So that ease of transaction, how easy you are to work with, how, empathy-led are you? Do you stop and ask good questions? Do you get to know your clients? Do you uncover their pain points? That can stay with you forever, and that is a huge competitive advantage. There are, other things that will continue to change. I think the one constant in media is change. That is something that we've all learned the hard way over time. And it can be a really good thing. It can be positive, but it's not always. So I think my takeaway is you can't always rely on the product to sell for you. You never want to offset that. You always want to know that no matter what you're selling or whatever the situation, you can do it justice and you can ask those appropriate questions. And, you don't need an easy advantage to sell. I think in this market, with all of the acquisitions and with things moving and changing, you can't just rely and think that, you're in a good spot and things will never change. That just isn't the case in media.
Completely agree. Could not agree more. Let's jump into the listener question.
I can't ask my sales manager that.
This person has withheld their name and their employer, and the reason they said is because they have a very distinct accent that will be very recognisable. And reading the question, I can understand why. So I've got somebody else to actually record the question for us, but here it is.
Hey there. There's no nice way to put this, so I'm just going to say it. I sell ad space, and my product, it kinda sucks. I work for a B2B publisher, and look, there's nothing wrong with us. But we have 3 very strong competitors who serve the same audiences as we do. I find my company is late to adopt new platforms, our content feels a little lackluster, and the sales team certainly aren't supported with the same level of resourcing. Do you do any workshops or training sessions for businesses like mine? I really want to show my market VP that we need to invest in certain areas to be able to compete.
So the first answer is no, I don't. But I thought that this was still an interesting, reflecting on this kind of question, it's an interesting one for us to unpack because it feels like this person probably is struggling with identifying a competitive advantage in a very tight market with some very capable competitors. What's your initial take on that particular issue?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I do think a lot of us have been there. Selling is definitely more fun when you're really passionate about the product, but I would say that a mistake that some sellers, and definitely myself included, make is that we don't document this information. And so then you come back to your boss and you're saying things like, our competitors are better than us, they're winning deals, I'm losing deals. I don't know what happened there, but they won it. And to a sales leader, it just sounds like excuses. All right. Even though it's not, it sounds like excuses unless you can document it and back yourself up. So the better way to approach it would be to say, hey, sales leader, company owner, it sounds like this is a smaller team. Here's a list of 10 clients that I've lost to each of these competitors. Here's how much they spent. So that's real money that we could have had, and exactly why they chose the competitor over us, right? That's going to be an uncomfortable conversation after you lose a deal, making that phone call. but it's worth it. If you do that, you have a much better chance of getting exactly what you want from your sales leader or business. It's not guaranteed, but at least you're, giving them a succinct business argument for why they should be moving in this other direction. The sales leader sees the exact money and revenue that's tied to not moving forward. And then it's also great for you because one, it validates your concerns. And two, I think because then as a seller, there are certain things in your control. You can't always control the product. And to kind of go off your example before, you can now use this list to be able to tackle these differences ahead of time. So next time you meet with that client, you know that they care about X because they told you they went with that account over you or that competitor over you because of that reason. And so now you know how to approach them in the future. Maybe it's something that you can't solve, but you have that information and you can take that into the next conversation with you. I think that is always worthwhile. I will definitely add that I did work for a company at one point in my career, and there was a rep who was very vocal about saying, if we had X, this client will spend with us and they will spend a lot. I know, he said point blank, they will spend if we have this. The company then went away, invested, created it. And once that was done, it took a bit of time. Once that was done, we went back to that client and they said, no, we're still going to go with competitor because we don't want to change, or you don't have everything that we need. They made up a bunch of other excuses. So my learning from that as well is that, that's an entirely different session on objection handling that I'm sure that you've done in a previous episode. But the top line is that you need to dig deeper. So don't let them give you an easy excuse of, I went with competitor without a reason, and dig into what that reason is and make sure you're actually getting to the bottom of the issue so that you know what you're truly solving for and you're not, putting yourself on the line to tell your company that you need to move in one direction when it was just something they kind of said to blow you off.
I completely agree. And I think I was grappling with this one too, because the question is phrased in such a way of how do I plead my case to the business? I mean, that's a lofty conversation, and that's, to turn that ship around is going to take a lot of time, and there's a lot of other priorities, and there's a bunch of things there. And I guess the thing that came out to me was, I totally agree with what you said there, by the way, in terms of documenting and having the business rationale. But in the short term, if you aren't in love with your product, you're not going to be able to instill that belief or confidence into the client. And so to me, we kind of need to snap that mindset in the short term while we build out the longer term business rationale too. There's got to be something that you do that is different, unique, that your competitors can't do as well as you, or that are going to have a difficult time competing against. It might not be immediately apparent, but to your point, Sarah, is it just being easier to buy? Is it just having less friction in the transaction? Is there something you can do around being more flexible in certain areas? Are there things that are truly unique in your offering that you just need to lead with more and to dial up in your pitch? I don't know. I think maybe working in really tight sort of markets where there's not a lot of differentiation, it comes a bit more naturally to some people, being able to kind of unlock these types of little pockets of opportunity that you can exploit. But for B2B publishers in a tight market, surely there would be something that might be apparent that is a differentiator or an area of opportunity that is different than the other three. I mean, is that a fair assessment, do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think you're right. Like that attitude towards it, it's so easy, especially when you're selling in a tight market, to get down on yourself and down on your product when you lose a couple of deals. So I think also just being able to really shake that off and focus on the positive. I think that what you said just then, that's a really great example of just control what you can control. Do the documenting on the back end, but day to day, you've got to keep selling this product. So how do you do that? You change your attitude.
Absolutely. And I can guarantee, having worked for market leaders and having worked for challengers throughout my career, the market leaders don't win all the business just based on how good their product or resourcing is, right? There's definitely times where you've worked in an absolute, an undisputed market leadership kind of role. You've still had some challenger brands come and take a fair share of revenue off you or sideswipe you with a big deal getting lost. So I definitely think that this is, this is an opportunity to kind of think a bit more. And maybe I'll sort of put your LinkedIn details in the notes, and this person might be able to connect to have a bit of a chat after. But look, thank you for your time. That kind of concludes the listener question. I suppose in wrapping this all up, was there maybe any sort of parting thought around competitive advantage that you wanted to leave the audience with that they could maybe apply immediately this week?
So my love of sales really came from my dad. He sold real estate, 20 plus years. And he would always say to me, it's so easy to get frustrated and really down on yourself when you lose a deal, right? And the way to kind of counteract that is to think going into a year, all right, I'm okay with losing 5 deals. If I lose 5 deals, that's annoying, but I can live with myself and I'm going to get better. I'm like pledging that I'm going to get better because of it. That has always really stuck with me because it's just a good way to level set, and it's so much easier to shake off a loss if you're expecting it. So having said that, you want to fight hard for the deals. You want to win as many as you possibly can. Ideally, you don't want to lose anything. But it's a good kind of perspective to have just to ensure that you are able to keep going and you can keep moving and you can shake that loss off. There's nothing worse than having a loss and having it keep you down for a day or a week, even a month. And then you potentially lose more deals because of it, because it shakes your confidence, because it shakes your beliefs, because it, shakes that relationship. If you're expecting it, it happens. You're disappointed, you keep moving.
I love that. Phenomenal thought to end on. Hey, Sarah, thanks so much for making the time. This was a really, really great conversation. I really enjoyed hearing some of your insight. And hey, I wish you all the best in your cool new gig over there in New York. And hopefully we can have you back on the podcast at another time.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd love to come on anytime. Thanks for having me.